Welcome to Coffee and Regs.
There's been so much focus on regulatory examinations recently, and I know that we're seeing the SEC being really, really active in the space of examinations, both of newly registered advisors as well as firms that have not been registered for a while. So very much in line with the SEC priorities. So what are your initial thoughts on the regulatory examination kind of environment these days?
Yeah, I would say that first off, we know examinations are such a stressful time for an advisor. Being both of us having been in-house, it is something that you kind of have in the back of your mind. You're always worried about, are we going to be examined? We get a lot of questions from firms saying, what does an examination look like? When can I be examined? What can I expect? And so I think that talking about this topic is really important to hopefully give firms a sense of comfort and a little bit of insight as to what they can expect during an examination. But you're absolutely right. We are seeing that examinations are up. The SEC is very active. And while we don't have any data right now for 2021, but the most recent data we have is from the SEC publishes their exam results on an annual basis. And in 2020, they conducted roughly 3,000 exams. And that's only down, that's actually down a little bit from 2019, only down about 4%. And I think that the large reason for that is the pandemic that we went through, that we're continuing to operate through. But I don't think the pandemic has really slowed down the SEC as much as we might think. And so the examiners are looking at doing examinations remotely. They've been doing it remotely for quite some time now, and I don't see any shift in that, at least in the near future. And these remote examinations are being done, largely a lot of times through Zoom or other kind of video conferencing. But we're seeing more and more where these examinations are just being done via audio. And I think that this is great. I think this gives advisors a little bit of pressure off of them to not be visual with the examiners, and allows for a little bit of communication off screen between the advisors. We have the standard kick somebody under the table when they're talking too much. This certainly allows for firms to communicate one-on-one with each other without having the examiners privy to that. And I think it does end up being a benefit. But going remotely with these examinations also seems to be resulting in examinations just taking longer from start to finish. I think that the initial requests, responses are typical. Usually you get about 10 to 14 days to respond to an initial request. But the follow-up, I think it's more often than not, the follow-up is delayed. And I don't want to put too much weight in an anecdotal experience, but one firm that I'm presently working with, they waited 2 months from the document production to then have a discussion about their compliance program. So there's this huge rush. It was, we got this exam. We have to get all this documentation together. Let's do it. Let's meet the deadlines. And then it was a hurry up and wait scenario. So I think that advisors should be prepared to have the experience and the examination just to take a lot longer than expected or than previously. And also, as we look at examinations, what we see now is that we have new leadership at the SEC, and this could certainly trigger a different approach to examinations. Exams can take certainly different tones based upon the priorities, goals, and candidly, the individuals that are conducting the exam. And sometimes exams are viewed as, trying to be helpful, understanding that advisors aren't perfect, that they're hoping to strengthen a compliance program, looking for opportunities to get better. And other times, exams can take a little bit more of a rigorous or draconian approach in that, a request could be your manual on page X says Y, where is it? And so it remains to be seen, I think, how the new leadership will set the tone for examination. New leadership took their position earlier in 2021. but there's a difference between tone and priorities. And luckily, the examiners publish their priorities annually in an effort to promote transparency and candidly consistency across its offices. And what we're seeing is that examiners are really taking to heart the 2021 SEC examination priorities. And I know certainly by you watching or listening to this presentation, you've got access to the internet. And if you're so inclined to learn more about the priorities, read them in detail, see exactly what the examiner said, they're a quick Google search away. So I'm not going to bore you by reading what the examination priorities are. But in terms of things to be aware of, some takeaways from the priorities, we're seeing a really big and consistent focus on fees, and namely advisory and wrap fees. And Korrine, I know you're going to talk a little bit more about the advisory fees and what the expectations are. But they want to make sure that there's clear and consistent disclosure. Firms have policies and procedures, and that disclosure of fees really feeds into some focus on Form CRS. So if you think about it, Form CRS is one of the newer regulations that advisors are dealing with. And so the SEC is now going through and looking at saying, all right, well, is there even a Form CRS created? And is that CRS even any good? Are you meeting all the requirements that are laid forth? So we've got fees, we've got Form CRS deficiencies, and we also, it wouldn't be a list of exam priorities without cybersecurity. I think it's been included now for the last 8 to 9 years worth of priorities. We've seen numerous risk alerts. We see cybersecurity only examinations. And what we just recently saw, and is something I want to talk about here with SEC Chair Gary Gensler's comments just a couple of days ago to the United States Senate. And for those of you that are listening later on, this is his comments were made on September 14th, 2021. And in his comments, he talked about how the SEC may soon propose a rule that would require firms to have standardized cybersecurity systems and to monitor their digital risks. So they're talking about laying out the systems firms should have and how they have to manage their risks. It also looks to lay out expectations for what a firm should do to handle the after effects of a hack or some other kind of similar incident. And to this, I say, finally, thus far, the approach from the regulators has been, well, there's no one size fits all approach. It has to be tailored to your firm. And while that is still very much applicable and will always be applicable, it needs to be tailored to your firm, there's candidly been little substantive guidance or requirements, and they've been more like best practices. And in my discussions with firms, both in-house and as a consultant, it's, most firms, most IT professionals would very much welcome some specifics, some requirements. Most of them say, whatever we're supposed to do, we'll do it. Just tell us what it is. And hopefully with a proposed rule, we would get some specifics so that you can point to what exactly is being required of firms as it relates to cyber. And this continues the SEC's focus. If you looked at the mid-year agenda, the SEC mentioned that they want to have a cybersecurity rule, hopefully in this year. So all signs are pointing towards this being a continued focus. And this means it should be a continued focus for everyone. And candidly, it should be a continued focus for everyone, regardless of what industry you're in, not necessarily just for advisors.
This has been another episode of Coffee and Regs.